Welcome to the Saskatchewan Waste Reduction Council's video on home composting. This production is produced by the Saskatchewan Waste Reduction Council, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping individuals, businesses, and municipalities minimize waste. This presentation will look at how your household can divert kitchen and yard materials from the garbage to the soil. During this presentation, we will look at the following topic areas: why composting is important, other options for handling compostable materials, how a compost pile works, how to start a compost pile, maintenance tips, compost bins, and using finished compost. Compost is the dark, crumbly, earthy-smelling material that results from the breakdown of living things. Mature compost is also called humus. Materials that can be returned to the soil are valuable resources. Because the organic part of soil gets used up over time and needs to be replenished. Adding compost to soil also improves its structure, meaning that the soil particles stick together better. Compost improves soil's air and water holding capacity and acts as a low-level, slow-release fertilizer. In natural systems like a forest, dead plants and animals decay and replenish the soil with nutrients for living plants to use. In human systems, many materials that could be used to enrich the soil end up as garbage. Food scraps, green plant material, dry leaves, and wood make up about 1/3 of the total garbage over the course of a year. In the summer months, these things can account for 50% of the waste going to landfills. These materials are easy to remove from the waste stream, as people living in houses can look after most of them right in their own backyards and improve the soil in their gardens, flower beds, and lawns. Removing food materials, yard waste, and wood from the landfill is a good idea. It means that the landfill site will last longer and long-term problems with methane gas and leachate can be avoided. When there is nothing to eat, rodents don't find landfill sites as attractive. Backyard composting is an important part of the strategy for removing these materials from the landfills. There are a lot of different ways to add plant and food materials back into the soil. Most people use formal composting as only one of several strategies. Let's have a look at the options. Leaving grass clippings on the lawn is a perfectly acceptable way to manage them. They add fertility and do not encourage thatch. A mulching mower is a good idea if you are purchasing new equipment. If you are re-landscaping, consider plans that minimize lawn area, where the lawn has been replaced by drought-tolerant trees, shrubs, and perennials. The process of tilling leaves and other materials directly into the soil is called sheet composting. It is best to do this in the fall so that the decay process is well advanced before planting next spring. Mulch is a layer of material on top of the soil that slows evaporation, discourages weeds, and protects against temperature extremes. A 4-inch layer of leaves makes a good mulch. In Saskatchewan, it's best to apply mulch around annual plants after the soil is warm and they are well established. Water will penetrate more easily if the leaves are shredded with a lawnmower or a shredder. A 3 to 4-inch layer of grass clippings also makes a good mulch. Avoid using clippings that have had herbicide applied within the last month. Small tree branches, up to about 2 inches in diameter, can be turned into wood chips with small-scale shredders. Wood chips make good, long-lasting mulches around shrubbery and trees. Shredders are fairly expensive to buy and can be dangerous, but you may be able to rent one or find someone to do shredding for a fee. Homeowners usually have a variety of other wood scraps to handle. Larger tree branches can be processed for firewood, while dimension lumber scraps can be used for small construction projects, such as a compost bin. Elm wood needs special treatment to avoid the spread of Dutch elm disease by bark beetles, so contact your community officials for information on proper handling. Trench composting is an organized way of burying food scraps in the garden. The scraps should be covered with several inches of topsoil, with the trenches lying between rows or in fallow portions of the garden. A wide range of food scraps can also be processed indoors with red wiggler worms. You can get more information on worm composting from the Saskatchewan Waste Reduction Council. If you live in the country and raise livestock, you have the option of feeding food scraps to chickens or pigs. Later, their manure can be used as fertilizer. The final option we'll discuss is composting in piles or bins. Formal composting requires a little more effort than some of the other methods we've mentioned, but it has some definite advantages. Compost allows you to handle many materials in one system. The finished compost can be moved to where you wish to use it and is less restricted by season than sheet or trench composting. All the options we've described are good ways to return food and yard wastes to the soil. Many people use a combination of approaches, but formal composting is usually part of the mix because of the advantages we've just listed. Composting goes more smoothly if you understand the process. Sharing that understanding with children can help knowledge pass from one generation to another. The rest of this video explains how the composting process works and how to make and use compost. Compost is made by mixing moist organic materials in piles or in bins. The process is finished when the materials are dark, crumbly, and unrecognizable. The process takes about 3 months in warm weather. The composting process is all about eating, with the most important eaters being bacteria and fungi. They're also called microbes because you need a microscope to see them. The compost pile is both a place to live and a food source for these organisms. The microbes are already on the composting materials, but the success of the compost process depends on how well their needs are met. One of the first needs is a balanced diet. Microbes like lots of high-carbon browns, such as dry leaves, dry grass, and straw. And they need some high nitrogen greens, including green plants, food scraps, and manure. The leaves, dry grass, dead plants, and straw shown here are the browns available to most compost makers. The microbes need these high-carbon materials to meet their energy needs. Browns break down very slowly on their own, store well, and can be added to the compost as needed. Wood chips and paper products are very high-carbon materials that are slow to decompose, but can be used when no other browns are available. Green grass, fresh plant material, and food scraps are the high nitrogen greens commonly available to the home composter. The bacteria need access to this nitrogen if they're going to thrive. Greens tend to decompose quickly, but cause a lot of odor problems if composted alone. They do not store well and should be mixed with browns and composted immediately. Alfalfa hay and farm animal manure are excellent sources of nitrogen for your compost if they're available. Small additions of high nitrogen fertilizers can also be used. 2 parts green to 3 parts brown is a mix that generally suits the microbes' tastes. Microbes chew with enzymes instead of teeth, so they can only eat when the materials are moist. Microbes also use moisture to move around and prefer a compost mix that is about as wet as a damp sponge. This is a very important issue on the prairies, where compost piles can dry out quickly. Check the moisture level of your compost pile regularly in the warm months and add water if needed. Bacteria are the main microbes at work in your compost pile in the early stages of decomposition. They work more effectively when they have access to air. Air can be added to a pile by turning or mixing the materials. When bacteria have food, water, and air, they break things down quickly and create heat and odorless gas. This is the type of decomposition you want in your compost pile. Compost piles can reach about 160 degrees Fahrenheit or 60 degrees Celsius. This is hot enough to kill weed seeds, but if your compost pile doesn't get that warm, don't worry, as decomposition will still take place. When compost piles run out of air, the bacteria keep working, but they have to use a different approach, and the byproducts are not welcome. Rotten egg gas or hydrogen sulfide is one of the several smelly signs that oxygen is not available. Little heat is generated by this process, and weed seeds generally survive. Although hydrogen sulfide is a poisonous gas if it collects in a confined space, it's not usually an issue with outdoor composting. Chopping up materials lets the microbes work much faster. Garden shears and sharp spades are common hand tools used to chop materials, and if you have one, a machete is a great chopping tool. Shredders are a good way to chop a variety of materials, but they're expensive to buy. So look for someone in your community who does custom shredding. It's also possible to shred your leaves with a lawnmower. It is useful to add a small amount of topsoil to compost piles, as the soil helps limit odor problems and adds more microbes to the mix. Compost bins or piles should be at least a cubic meter in size. Piles smaller than this won't hold their heat, dry out faster, and will take longer to break down. In summary, in order for everything to work right, composting needs microbes, browns and greens, water, oxygen, and soil. Composting benefits from chopped materials and at least a cubic meter of materials. Now that you know the elements of composting, let's look at how to put together a compost pile. It is easiest to start a compost pile in the spring or the fall. Compost can be made into open piles or bins, and fresh materials are added at the top for about a year. Then the finished compost is harvested from the bottom. Our demonstration pile is being made on a tarp so that you can see it more easily. Here we see some stocky materials being used at the bottom of the pile. Most piles are not turned thoroughly, and these bulkier materials help with aeration. A layer of greens is placed on top of the base layer. A small amount of soil or finished compost is added. A layer of browns, slightly larger than the green layer, is added to the pile, and a fork is used to mix the two layers. Building by layers makes measuring easier, but then the different kinds of materials need to be mixed so that the microbes have access to both kinds of food. Add water at intervals as you build a pile, and keep adding materials until you've used up all the greens. After your pile is started, continue to add nitrogen-rich greens like food scraps as they become available. And always cover kitchen scraps with leaves or other browns to balance the mix and to avoid insect problems. Avoid adding fats and oils as they are hard for bacteria to break down. Avoid adding meat since it creates odors and attracts animals. Avoid adding bones as they don't break down and also attract animals. It is also good to avoid adding large amounts of dairy products. Many of them are high in fat, and they all attract animals to the compost site. Other items to avoid are dog or cat manure, as it may have parasites, weeds with mature seeds that may persist if not heated thoroughly, and diseased plants that may spread disease. Kitchen scraps can be collected in a small lidded pail that is either kept on the kitchen counter or in another convenient spot. Lining the bottom with a piece of newsprint reduces odors and speeds cleanup, and the newsprint can be added to the compost pile. This picture shows a tidy setup where the garbage can and the compost bucket are both attached to the inside of the cabinet doors under the sink. High carbon browns store well and can be kept on hand to add to the greens as they become available. These are the points to remember. First, dry materials don't compost, so keep the mix moist. Second, greens smell bad fast, so mix them with browns as soon as possible. Third, browns store well, so keep a supply handy. Fourth, make sure there are paths for air in the mix. If the microbes are provided with a good food mix, air and water, some finished compost will be available in about 3 months of warm weather. Piles like this, made inside a plastic bin, are often added to for a year and then disassembled. The mature compost is harvested, and the undecomposed material is added to the new pile. You may run into a number of signs of trouble during composting. Some of the signs to watch for that can be easily fixed are: if the pile is smelly, turn it and add some browns and soil to the mix. If the pile is cold and moist and materials are not completely composted, mix in some greens. Similarly, if the pile is cold and dry and materials are not completely composted, add water and stir. If the pile is too wet, return and add more materials, especially browns. Compost piles are dormant in the winter months, but the microbes become active again in the spring. Food scraps may be added directly to the pile throughout the winter, or can be stored outdoors in bags or pails and added in more organized fashion in the spring. Compost can be made in open piles or bins. Piles are a good choice if there's a large volume of materials or if space is not an issue. Piles can be covered with plastic sheeting or a tarp to keep the surface layer from drying out. Compost bins come in many styles, so it's worth putting some thought into the type of bin that will best suit your needs. Accessibility is important. The easier it is to put in materials, stir them, and remove finished compost, the more that you are going to enjoy composting. The best bin design balances the need to let air in without letting moisture out. Dry materials do not compost, and things can dry out very quickly on the prairies in the summertime. Consider the amount of materials you have available to compost. This will determine the size of bin you need. Many people have no problem at all with rodents, but they are worth thinking about when you're choosing a bin. What is considered affordable and attractive varies greatly from person to person. Here are some examples of different bin types. Single-unit black plastic bins are available from most garden supply stores. Their design allows for easy addition of materials and aeration without too much moisture loss. It is best suited for people with small volumes of compost. The bin has a sliding section at the bottom for removing completed compost. However, this does not always work well. The easiest way to remove compost from this type of bin is to pull the bin up off the pile, set it up in a new location, then put all the uncomposted material back into the bin. A multiple unit bin with removable front panels is a good choice if you have lots of materials to compost. It can be constructed on site with new or salvaged wood, but preserved wood should not be used. This style of bin allows you to turn compost from one section to another, with the third section being used to store leaves or straw. Some plants call for wire mesh to be used on the sides and back, but this allows too much drying in the prairies. Barrel composters are another type of compost bin. They are harder to build and more expensive to buy. Models that are designed with good drainage and internal baffles are very efficient units. These represent good choices for people with back problems or concerns about rodents. Rodents and other animals can pose problems for composters. Sometimes they are attracted by food, sometimes by the warmth. Following the suggestions about leaving up bones, meat, and fat, and adding soil to the mix greatly reduces the attractiveness of compost to animals. Mouse traps are an effective way to control mice if they're visiting your pile. Sturdy plastic bins with relatively small air holes are designed to minimize problems with rodents. Lining bins with hardware cloth, like the bin in the picture, and having a secure lid will keep out larger animals. Where you put a compost bin or pile in your yard is an important decision. The best place is one which is sunny in the spring and shaded in the fall. Deciduous trees are the likeliest source of this kind of seasonal shade. Open-bottom bins are usually placed directly on the soil, but the process will still work if there's concrete under the bin. Other things to consider when choosing where to put your bin are ease of access, aesthetics, and the possibility of occasional bad smells. Composting greatly reduces the volume of materials, so it's hard to make too much. The main method of using compost is to dig it into garden or flower bed topsoil. This will improve the soil structure and air and water holding capacity and fertility. It also gives a boost to the soil microorganism population. If you have enough, a 1 or 2 inch layer of compost can be dug into the garden annually. People with large gardening spaces have to use it more sparingly to enrich the soil for selected plants. Compost is sometimes added to the surface of the soil around plants that could use a fertility boost in the middle of a growing season. This technique, called side dressing, can also be used around perennials. Putting finished compost through a wire mesh screen gives a much finer product. The coarser material left over can be returned to the compost bin to continue decomposing. Screen compost can be used as part of a potting soil mix, or small amounts can be added to the surface of the soil of existing house plants. You can give your lawn a boost by raking half an inch, 1 centimeter, of screen compost into the grass. It is also good to do this after an aeration so the compost can fall into the holes where plugs have been removed. Compost tea is a useful, easily made substance. It is used to water transplanted plants and revive ailing ones. You can make a pailful by putting about a liter of compost in a mesh bag and letting it steep. Larger volumes can be made in barrels with burlap bags full of compost. The compost you have used to make the tea can be dug into the garden when you've finished. Composting on the prairies is a good idea. It helps to reduce the flow of household waste to our landfills and improves the quality of backyard soil. If you have questions or would like more information about any of the topics covered in this video, contact the Saskatchewan Waste Reduction Council in Saskatoon at 306-931-3242 or email us at swrc@link.ca. You can also mail us at Saskatchewan Waste Reduction Council, number 203, 115 2nd Avenue North, Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, S7K 2B1. Thanks to Shell Canada for their financial assistance in the production of this video. Happy composting!